if you take these things in her self-control chapter and you actually role play this with your children so they practice it and do it, this can be an absolute game changer. I want to introduce Dr. Charles Sophy. He's a board-certified psychiatrist. He's a former medical director of the Department of Child and Family Services here in LA, the largest agency of its type in the entire United States. One of the things I like about the book, and I'm doing shameless plugs for this book, Family Values, Reset Trust, Boundaries, and Connection with Your Child. One of the things I love about this is it really gives some red flags, some ways for parents to notice, recognize when a child is hurting, when a child is having problems, because you start out by saying, we've got to have a baseline and you've got to compare your child to baseline.
Right.
I could come in and look at a child, even as a professional, and until I know what's normal for the child, I don't know whether he or she has deviated from some kind of norm. But parents know what that norm is.
Right. Or should know what that norm is.
Yeah, they should know what that
Right.
norm is. You talk about in the book, part one is finding the reset button and parenting with a new lens. And you didn't write this book for the pandemic, but it becomes acutely relevant because of the pandemic.
Correct. Yeah.
And you talk about parenting with a new lens. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think many parents feel that they're stuck or it's too late or I came from not great role models myself. What good can I do? I'm only doing what I came from. And that's what I'm trying to show them. It's not, you don't have to live with that. It's never too late. You can always be a better parent, even if you have an adult child. So it's never too late. And it's always should be invigorating to be able to reset yourself and look through a different lens. And that lens isn't going to come unless you take a good hard look at yourself and understand that where you came from doesn't mean that's where you have to stay. And many people say, and I'm sure you've heard it many times, I'm not going to do what my parents did. I'm going to do the exact opposite. But they end up running right into that and becoming their parents. And that's because they never looked at themselves and they didn't look at what they didn't like about what their parents did, understanding their parents probably did the best they could. And what do you want to do differently? And so that's what I talk about in part one. What can we do differently that's easy and simple to fix so that you can reset yourself and look through a different lens?
You and I have talked many times about generational legacy.
Right.
We all grow up with some aspects of our upbringing that we don't like and some that we do. When you say parents have to take a look at themselves, you got to decide, what did you carry from your parents into your parenting that's toxic? If your parents blew up and yelled and screamed and cussed and slammed things around and you see yourself doing that, you go, okay, this is a generational legacy. I'm carrying forward things that I lived with and I shouldn't be carrying these forward. And that's
Right.
what you're saying. Let's look at this with a new lens. And you got to be willing to take a hard look at yourself and say, okay, am I doing the sins of my father? Am I doing the
Right.
sins of my mother?
Right.
Am I doing the
Right.
same things they did to me? Am I doing it to my own kids? Because I'll hear parents all the time say, oh, I hated when my mother did this, and I'm doing the same damn thing.
Right. They run right back into it.
One of the greatest parental pitfalls is the parent's own need to be significant in the child's eyes. And in doing that, they use their children for their sense of worth and identity and never let the child find their way. And that's why we're raising this generation of these very fragile children and very enmeshed, overly identified as being parents. And this is a failure, I believe, and we need to remedy it with compassion and understanding, but we need to do so quite immediately.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. You have tips on parenting, and your number 2 tip, if I can just read this, it says, reframe every struggle with your child as an invitation for your personal growth and awareness. When you make this internal pivot, you begin to shift how you view your child and how you relate to them. can you commit to asking yourself, what does this moment say about me? Just this one pivot has the power to change your entire dynamic with your children. So you're saying, can you commit to asking yourself, what does this moment say about me? Now, here's my question. Based on parental legacy, based on the fact that there is a generational legacy, a parental legacy, that anonymous poem, Children Learn What They Live, is so profound. If a parent grew up in a dysfunctional home, if they grew up with broken parents, they come from divorce, they come from alcoholic parents, they come from a violent home or whatever, where do they find the insight, the energy, the resource to do this seemingly simple thing that you're talking about? Can you commit to asking yourself, what does this moment say about me? How do they find that and get that direction when they're a product of broken parenting themselves?
Right. I get this question so often in another way when people ask me, your work in conscious parenting is about becoming conscious. But how do I become conscious of that that's unconscious? Here's the way you do it, or the way it will be done to you. Our life will eventually fall apart to such a degree that we will hit the rubber will hit the road, so to speak, which means our ego, our coping strategies will eventually stop working. And one day we will have this rock bottom moment, which I, as a therapist, wait for, not in a perverse way, but in an invitational way, because it's that rock bottom moment. So that last fight with your 16-year-old, your fifth grader is dropping out of school, your 20-year-old refuses to talk to you. All these pivotal moments of pain will happen where your ego is forced to surrender and you're forced to say, okay, what in me now needs to heal? So sadly or gladly, pain is the way that we come to our greatest awakening. I often say pain is the greatest portal for our transformation. But till that happens, we will keep being dysfunctional. And eventually something cracks where we wake up. And the reason I do parenting more than anything else, and I talk about parenting, is because with every other client, it's so hard to break their ego. But with the parent, I have found, because of our intense love and devotion for our children and our inability to really see them in pain, that I find that the defense of the parent cracks a little bit, and I can get in there and help them to see how so much of this is a repetition of their own childhood. And finally, because they love their children so much, the parent is slightly willing to see how they are so co-creating these patterns. And, our children are our greatest mirrors. They are the ones for whom we will do work for, like I've never seen them do it for anyone else. So that's why I talk about conscious parenting so much.
Yeah, they're certainly motivated. Most parents, they'll lay down in front of a train for their child if they need to. It does motivate them. When we talk about these kids that are getting into their teens, you had a nice way of putting it a little bit ago. You said, no screens until teens. This is something that social media, the web, is just a reality in life today. I mean, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. When I started the Dr. Phil show, there were no social media platforms. That's how old I am and how long I've been on the air. And it's created a whole new set of toxicity, a whole new set of challenges. We've had to deal with cyberbullying and children committing suicide from that. Just horrible fallout from it. When do you think, and I know every child is different, some are mature sooner than others, and every situation differs. But when do you think it's appropriate for parents to allow their child to have a smartphone or an iPad, a computer that's internet capable?
Again, it's a hard one to answer because our schools are giving our kids internet, iPads to do math on. But if the parent truly understood the dangers of letting their children foray into the world of the internet without supervision, guidance, controls, they would really agree with me. And I would say that age is no earlier, and I'm talking about the most controlled, disciplined kid, 13 or 14 years old, no earlier. And this may sound rigid and excessive, but I've seen the effects so close. I've seen children being exposed to porn before their brains could, metabolize the information. Children being exposed to cyberbullying, being called fat, stupid, and ugly when they did not need to be exposed to that kind of, disrespect and slander. So there may be a lot of educational elements, and therefore the parent needs to supervise and have strong boundaries, and not let the child just have this unmitigated, unmediated access to this jungle out there. And that's what we're talking about, is good boundaries. But I'll tell you, and you know this, we can tell a parent have boundaries, and the parent can start out by having good boundaries. But the number one fights in all the houses of parents who come to me for counseling is around the boundaries around social media. I mean, I'm negotiating these boundaries with these children as young as 7 or 8. So we're not fighting about TV time anymore, where the parent could hide the remote. We are talking about the child's phone. So we've given them a phone or a device too early, before their time. And now we are having fights and conflicts over something we should have never given to them in the first place. So parents, don't feel like you're the bad guys if you have strong boundaries around social media. And don't be afraid to institute them, because you're really allowing your children to do things like we used to do it in childhood, like get bored, be creative, stare outside a window, pick up a pen and doodle and draw. These are all things that are pro healthy development that our children are now being robbed of because of our own and their screen addiction.
Nobody works harder probably in this world than our single moms. And no one is more devoted to the love of the children. And there are many things that single moms can do. Number one, to give their children balance. Number one is to understand the differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting, and value that enough to bring the father back into the family. But if the father is absolutely hopeless and can't be brought into the family or has passed away, there's also things that moms can do, like get their children involved in faith-based communities, get them involved in sports. And I don't mean just sports, like team sports. I mean what I call the liberal arts of sports, which is team sports, which is pickup team sports, which are very important for developing entrepreneurs, and also sports that require self-starting and to perform on your own. And when children have that combination, they can really develop very effectively. Find a mentor for your children if you're a single mom, but also encourage the mentor to help your son find somebody to mentor. Because just like Dr. Phil just said, his way of thinking about the world changed the moment he had Jay in his life and his other son in his life. A boy changes. He starts saying, I have to finish my homework, or I'll look like I won't be a good example for that boy I'm mentoring. I have to perform well in the sport like I said I was going to, or I'll look like a loser and the boy I'm mentoring will not pay much attention to me. It's the sense of feeling like I am needed that men and women both need, but women often get that the moment they have a child. A father has to be told his differences in the way he parents. Those differences are valued. I need you to roughhouse. I need you to press me on taking risks that are sensible risks with our son. I need you, husband, or I need you, a biological dad, even if we're divorced.
Yeah, and I wanted to point that out because if moms are listening and they say, well, great, I've got a son and the dad's a drug addict, or he's in prison, or he's just uninvolved, he's started another family and he just is not engaged in any way. So what? I'm screwed here. So my son's going to have his telomere 14% decreased and 40% more than 14% because he's a boy. So you're just telling me that I'm doomed because his dad's not here. And what you're saying is not true. You can fill that need in other ways, and you can do it by expanding your parenting style to continue to be the mother and the soft place to fall and all the things that mothers are so good at innately, but expand your parenting style to also include some things that are further out on the continuum than what you might normally do. And then make sure that he does have exposure to some well selected males that can provide that influence on him, and then putting him in that role so he can take up the responsibility and become the role model as well.
When I was writing Thrivers, my goal was to look at 7 traits that are highly correlated to success. Not every kid needs all 7 of those.
Can you tell us the 7?
Oh, sure. It starts with confidence. Confidence is knowing your strengths. And let's help our kid focus more on their strengths as opposed to their weaknesses. 77% of the time, we try to fix the kid as opposed to help them learn where you're going with your strengths. You know, the simplest thing that Emmy Warner discovered? Many of the children who really had extreme adversity in their life had a hobby. And the hobby, I didn't make a difference. It was guitar or books or hiking. They would go to that to decompress. Dr. Phil, when I was interviewing kids and said, what's your hobby? Many of them looked at me absolutely dumbfounded. Who's got time for a hobby? So that's number 1. We've got to start with that. Maybe we start being talent scouts. We walk around the house and we look at tuning into what our kids are good at as opposed to what their weaknesses are and start pointing that way. Another one would be empathy. We need social competence. We know that many children who are resilient have ability to connect with others. Now we've got loneliness factors, and social competence and empathy is made up of social skills. So if that's the part that's low, then let's start focusing in on how to help our kids get along. The third one is every kid in the world needs self-control, coping strategies, how to get rid of that stress so it doesn't become so darn unhealthy. There's at least 30 strategies in the self-control strategies, that chapter on how to help them. So you find one. You know, here's another thing that kids said, Dr. Phil. They said, I know you're teaching us self-control strategies, but it's not like a one-time course in a health unit. You got to give us a repertoire of stuff that we can actually do in the here and now. Then we got to practice it. Like on the show, I was teaching Kira the 1-2 breathing, which is so simple. As soon as the stress comes in, when you start identifying what your stress signs are, you take a slow, deep breath from real deep in your abdomen, like you're riding up an elevator. Keep focusing on the breath, hold it, then slowly let it out. The exhale is twice as long as the inhale. Kids said that really works, but unless you help us practice and practice and practice and practice when we're calm, it doesn't kick in.
What Dr. Borba is talking about here, a 1-to-2 ratio of inhale and exhale, is not as simple as it sounds. It has to do all the way to the cellular level of the exchange of oxygen and calming yourself down. So you can hear something like that and go, oh yeah, you had some lady on there talking about breathe slow. No, she's talking about regulating yourself. It's almost meditative. It causes you to really slow down and exercise control in the face of stress, which again, as I said earlier, you observe yourself doing. And that's just one of several things that she talks about in this chapter on self-control. I said she wasn't a theoretician, that she puts verbs in her sentences. This chapter on self-control puts your child back in command of their ship. And I can't tell you how important role-playing is. If you take these things in her self-control chapter and you actually role-play this with your children so they practice it and do it, this can be an absolute game changer. Okay, next.
Curiosity.
Yes,
I love curiosity. That's that kid who thinks out of the box with ideas and people. The easiest one on that one, when you go, what the heck does that have to do with resilience? It's not to raise a kid who's an Albert Einstein creative child, but it's a child who realizes that when they're confronted with a problem, there's no problem so great that can't be solved. And that's what you're looking for agency. The easiest way to do that from this moment on is when your child comes home or he's sitting there with a problem, don't solve it for him. Instead, what's bugging you, sweetie pie? Say it. And then you teach him the simplest thing that there is called brainstorming 101. Keep a poker face because some of the ideas they come up with are going to be off the chart. But what's one thing you could have done? What's another thing? For a kid who goes, how long do I have to do it? For 1 minute till the sand runs out. But if you keep brainstorming and then you're all done and you go, okay, now get rid of things that aren't safe, wise, or responsible. What's the one thing you're going to choose? Good. Now let's create the plan. What you're doing is creating agency. So when the child is faced with a real life problem, he's got it. And that's, again, what that thriver has. It's okay, Mom. I can do it myself. Oh, there's your moment to take a spa day, Mom. I got it.
Yeah, that's so important. Again, that's them observing themselves, figuring something out. And even if they're off the charts with some of them, that's so important. What we were talking about before of how we're preparing these kids in school, but it's perseverance.
Yes, it's perseverance. Here's the problem, Dr. Phil, is that every parent wants the kid to persevere right this minute. And what I discovered is that of these 7 traits, you got to have that self-control in order to have the buffer, or self-confidence is really wonderful in order to help that kid persevere. In fact, the other thing I learned that was my aha moment is it isn't one trait or 2 traits, but you put any 2 together, they multiply the outcome. So it's like superpowers for a child. Self-control and perseverance, wonderful. Carol Dweck has got the greatest solution on perseverance. Stop praising them for the end product. What you get? Did you get the 100%? What's the grade? Instead, you make success in your house become a 4-letter word, GAIN. Yesterday you were here, sweetie. You got 33 right. Tomorrow you're going for 34. It's one step, baby step. Success is always in steps. You never win the gold medal tomorrow. You win it in little teeny increments along the way. And that's the goal on perseverance. So wonderful on the science that tells us how to help our kids hang in there and not quit.
The last one you mentioned is optimism, which is so important.
You're watching a group of kids who have been every day for the last 2 years turning on a TV set and seeing how many people died today. Now you've got a live feeds of a horrific war. You've got images that are really impacting our kids. And many of them say, I just feel hopeless. I'm really worried about the world. I think this one is one of the easiest things from NYU that said, images that our kids see either elevate their empathy and their optimism, or they create doom and gloom. Okay, one of the easiest things you can do on that one, I think we don't do nearly enough. Look what the research says and apply it. Go to the back page of the newspaper every day. There's incredible, glorious stories about real kids doing wonderful stuff. Cut out the news, blow it up. Now you got another family meeting or an entertaining just dinner discussion. Did you hear about true story? Here, I love this one. The 2 kids in Ohio, they were so worried about the neighbor next door, Empathy 101, because she's 80, she's all by herself, Mom, she's so lonely. Can't we do something? What can you do, sweetie? I love Mommy. What can you do, kids? Can we drag our cellos to her porch and do a cello concert? Good idea, said Mom. They drag their cellos, go to the porch, knock on the door, they social distance, they do a little cello concert. Oh, the neighbors come out, they're crying, Mom's crying. She puts it on Facebook, it goes live. What happens is the virtual of all the rest of the children in the world look at it and go, I can do that too. You're elevating their heart. You're seeing tuba concerts in Sacramento, flute concerts in New York. We've got to show our kids the good stuff that's doable. Now they put it in their hearts. They've got the agency. That's what builds hope.